We light the chalice, the symbol of our living faith. If you are joining us online, you may wish to light a candle or chalice of your own. I invite you to hear today's chalice lighting words, an excerpt from The Right to Choose by Reverend Elizabeth Mount. For without consent, our ability to create becomes not a blessing, but a burden and an imposition. Without space for a no, there can be no trustworthy yes. Today we come to this holy place and time, ready to invoke the divine, to make space for the sacred, to co-create community once again. This too is a choice. You cannot, you may not be coerced into relationship with the holy or with one another. I invite you, I ask you to join us. I respect it if you will not today or ever. More sacred than any other individual need is choice. The right to know oneself, the right to know what you are ready for, what you need, to stretch when you can, to pause when you will, to know your body, your mind, your spirit better than anyone else, and ultimately, to be trusted with the responsibility of your own living. So today we're going to talk about what do you do with an idea. This was written by Kobi Yamada and illustrated by May Bizom. And so to help us focus on ideas and where they come from, we are going to get a crown for our head. So one day I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before. My idea showed up. There's his idea. See, it's getting bigger. Oh, you didn't see? Yeah. But there was something magical about my idea, I had to admit. I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food. It wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people, even though I was afraid of what they would say. I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly. Sure, and many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. Yeah. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea. I thought, no one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it a good food. I worked with it. I played with it. But most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew, and so did my love for it. I built a new house, one with an open roof, where it could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive. I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands because it said, it's a good idea to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without my idea. Then one day, something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings, took flight, and burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it just went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized, what do you do with an idea? You change the world. And that's the end. Thank you so much for listening. And you can take your crowns with you. Think.
As you go.
Our reading this morning is You Are Loved by the Reverend Greta Jo Seidel. Everyone loves someone who had an abortion. And let's talk about the flip side. If you had an abortion, you are loved. If you've never told a soul, or if you share your story regularly, you are loved. If you are confident in your decision or wonder if it was the right choice, you are loved. If you are a queer, non-binary, trans, two-spirit, or a cis woman, you are loved. If you are child-free by choice or want to have kids eventually, you are loved. If your choice was driven by medical viability or your own emotional health, you are loved. If you found a provider to care for you or had to rely on yourself, you are loved. If you are always pro-choice, or if your choice conflicts with your beliefs, you are loved. If you love your body or are still angry with your body, you are loved. If you believe God loves you or you believe in nothing divine at all, you are loved. If you find yourself reflected here or your truth is more than words and ink can post, you are loved.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanne Walsers, and I've been a member of this beloved community for 25 years. When Rev. Jen asked me to share a reflection with you this morning on the topic of reproductive justice, I really had to mull over just how I would cull from 50 years of experiences I've had as an active participant in this movement. That's right, 50 years, because it started back in 1973 when I was 15. How would I winnow it all down to an insightful, poignant, and rousing call to action? I had to decide what it was exactly that I wanted to convey. I considered using the format of the UU elevator speech. You're all familiar with the elevator speech concept, where you're supposed to be able to come up with why or what a Unitarian Universalist believes and why you are one in the space it takes to go down in the elevator. But I realized that to cram all in would require a very slow elevator ride in a very tall building that would conveniently get stuck between floors frequently. So instead, the highlight reel will skip over some of the details I've shared with many of you before. Two pieces of my personal history I will share with you at the start without going into detail, because they have had the most impact on my commitment to reproductive rights. I had an abortion at 15 years old in 1973, right after Roe was passed. And that decision changed the trajectory of my entire life. And the second is the loss of Shannon Lowney, a young receptionist at the Brookline Planned Parenthood Clinic in Massachusetts. She was my colleague, and she was murdered by a deranged anti-abortion fanatic in 1994. The aftermath of grief and despair over her untimely death at 25 is forever imprinted on those of us who experienced this tragic event. I could share many heartbreaking memories, stories of grief, loss, despair, violence, but also of joy, empowerment, of legislative success and failure, and of social change. I was both a volunteer and a devoted employee of Planned Parenthood for decades in 3 states. It was when I moved to Massachusetts in my early 30s that I became both a new UU and also added abortion counselor to the job titles I had held thus far for Planned Parenthood. I had been a family planning specialist, a medical assistant, a patient advocate, and a community health and sexuality educator. The Planned Parenthood health centers I had worked for in Texas previously had not provided abortion services. The job offered to me in Worcester was specifically as a counselor for people considering abortion. I thought long and hard about working in a facility that had been firebombed and invaded by Operation Rescue protesters. I had doubts that I could successfully cultivate the skills needed to create a healing space for those contemplating ending a pregnancy. And I was now the mother of a 3-year-old daughter as well, and I feared for my family's safety. I took the job with a feeling of trepidation, but also a powerful belief that I was now fully invested in doing my part to support reproductive rights on every level. When I look back over my career with Planned Parenthood, it is the experience I had holding sacred space for patients making wrenching decisions, for which I am most humbled and grateful. Here's what I'm not going to say. I'm not going to talk about writing letters, lobbying Congress, going to marches, donating time and money, becoming a volunteer clinic escort, attending rallies on the courthouse steps, canvassing, and voting. You are all aware of these myriad opportunities we have to support reproductive justice in this post-Roe world. Instead, I'm going to ask you to do a very brave thing. I'm going to ask you to stand on the side of love and try to seek out common ground, to refuse to escalate the hate, to step back from using language that incites and inflames. When Roe was overturned, I was very bitter. 50 years of fighting. I wrote a vitriolic letter to the newspaper in which I suggested compiling a national registry of all anti-choice politicians and their families and of anyone publicly professing to be anti-abortion. Those people would be absolutely forbidden from accessing abortion services, no matter what their circumstances. Payback, because the privileged can always find a way to circumvent the rules. As a counselor, I was appalled the first time a protester left the picket line to have an abortion in our health center. She was one of many to declare that she was vehemently anti-abortion, but that her particular circumstances warranted an exception to her blatant hypocrisy. And yet, every one of our patients, including her, was treated with respect, dignity, and compassion. Always. Sometimes they reverted to the picket line, but sometimes. After writing that letter and reflecting back on my many years of counseling, I had an epiphany. I have started to ratchet back the innate bias I harbored towards people holding anti-choice views. For most of them, it is their default setting until the crisis hits home. I have started to revisit my desire to cultivate common ground, because to hold fast to an all or nothing mindset when engaging with someone with opposing views is to ensure a dead end of any meaningful dialogue. Those who are unflinching opponents of abortion are stunned when they are faced with the consequences of being denied pregnancy care, either for themselves or for their loved ones. Because this is what the overturning of Roe has wrought. Ectopic pregnancies, fetal anomalies incompatible with life, cancer diagnoses during pregnancy, medical care during miscarriage. These are just a few of the crises that put patients at risk for death. So, when you have the opportunity to express empathy and extend compassion to a person who has held fast to their beliefs because they have never been tested by reproductive health tragedy, please consider standing on the side of love. Maybe, just maybe, your belief in the worth and dignity of every human being will enable some hearts to open and some minds to change. And in the meantime, it's still appropriate to be mad as hell and to fight like hell because we really can't take it anymore. So please choose your strategy for supporting reproductive rights and commit to it. But please also be brave and be willing to engage in those one-on-one conversations that might lead to a greater understanding and common ground between family, friends, and neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. So here we are, living in the age of the unthinkable. The idea that a constitutional law that was put in place by the highest court in the land 50 years ago could be overturned by 5 people in June of 2022. There were clearly many signposts along the way since 1973. A slow eroding of basic rights and access to reproductive care has been ever present, with clear evidence demonstrated with our escalating maternal child health mortality rates, increasing lack of access to health care, a 400% rise in anti-abortion terrorism, and over 407,000 children in foster care. Not to forget the trauma of faith alienation and afflictions of mental health distress related to reproductive issues. Reading the York Daily Record this week, someone commented, "The US is returning to a country of free and enslaved states." Currently, 12 states have enacted total abortion bans, with 20 others rapidly acting to advance laws to totally ban all access to freedom and agency over one's reproductive choices. On a grand scale, I believe humanity has crossed the tipping point and faces an enormous transformative era ahead. Everything is in flux and at risk. Nothing can be taken for granted. The choice to evolve and survive or regress and destroy is ours to decide. So how does one keep on keeping on and not succumb to burnout, dropping out, turning off, checking out, becoming cynical, living in constant fear or denial, or at worst, feeling hopeless? What does it take to attend the fire of commitment? For me, I have found a grounding in sacred activism, which is a transforming force of compassion in action that is rooted in a blend of deep spiritual wisdom, courage, love, and passion, fused with wise, radical action. It is a guiding force from which to act out of a deep ethical concern. It opens the way to find solutions to help shift hearts and minds. There are several approaches that I'd like to offer you this morning as resources for practicing sacred activism. For now, more than at any other time in history, I believe we are all being called into service to give of ourselves to this world. We have entered the time of Aquarius on the zodiacal wheel, the Bodhisattva house, where what we do for one, we do for the whole. We are all truly connected and we influence the web of existence. So several of these practices that I'm going to go over were suggested by Andrew Harvey. He is the founder and director of the Institute of Sacred Activism. First, every day select a word or a phrase of gratitude. Write them down. I keep mine next to my computer on a calendar. Along with the gratitude, select one thing that causes you awe, wonder, curiosity. At the end of the month, refer to them and say them all out loud to yourself. Repeat the next month. Read poetry, sacred texts, words by prophetic individuals. Pause and reflect a few times throughout the day on what was meaningful to you. Create something, anything. Make a delicious cup of coffee. Art, dance, music, woodworking. Go out, plant a garden. Do something that moves your energy within and around you. Reach out and connect to at least one person every day. Share in their joy, their grief. Say thank you. Offer appreciation, encouragement. Just listen. Skip a meal once a week, and at the end of the month, send in a check in the amount of missed meals to an organization that helps to feed the hungry. Find a community project in which you can participate with others. Build relationships. Identify what lights you up and calls your spirit into action, and go do it. For me, it's working for reproductive justice. What is the universe whispering for you to do? Finally, financial support of an organization that you believe aligns with your passion to bring more compassion and justice, sustainability, and love to this world. And last, seek to learn about the issues being discussed from your local school boards, county leaders, to legislators in Harrisburg. Our states have incredible power to affect the lives and freedoms of its residents. We each matter and can make a difference. Remember, only 5 individuals chose to unravel our freedom and unleash a profound repercussion we are witnessing and living. It is indeed the age of the unthinkable. What and where are you being called? How will you feed your fire of commitment?
Sorry, I'm so moved by the words that I'm hearing. Not ready to sing yet, but apparently it's time to sing. Speaking as a woman, I'm frightened by what's happened. I'm frightened for my daughter. And so the responsive song right now is, again, from the Teal hymnal. It's number 1012, When I Am Frightened. If we could rise and body your spirits as a response to these 2 powerful testaments that we've heard.
Sing to me quietly. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Donna, not just for your words today, but for the commitment, the fire of commitment that you have allowed to burn, that has motivated you to speak not just from a place of fear, a valid place, but from a place of love. Thank you. I don't need to rehash the entire timeline. January 22nd, 1973, Roe versus Wade. June 24th, 2022, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. When the news of the Dobbs decision came down, I was attending General Assembly in Portland, Oregon with many Unitarian Universalists and many clergy. We hastily called a meeting of the clergy who had committed to being part of an organization to support reproductive justice access, to support access to the needed maternal care that would now be denied to the faithful and even the unfaithful, because everyone has this right to make these hard choices, to struggle with them, to fight with themselves, to fight with their idea of God, to fight with everything they've been taught and believed, to try to make the choice that would be best for them. The fear and uncertainty that day was also buoyed by the fire of commitment. We've heard powerful personal testimony, so I want to spend just a few minutes this morning focusing on this phrase we've been using, reproductive justice. Many of you may have heard of different labels, pro-choice, reproductive rights. All of these have been valuable ways we have named some of this work in the 50 years since Roe, and of course the time before that. Reproductive justice specifically is a framework that has been put into place by Black women activists, were the ones who officially came up with the term reproductive justice. I'm going a little off book, so pardon me while I look around a little. In 1994, there was a meeting in Cairo, Egypt, the International Conference on Population and Development. That conference, it was decided, the entire world agreed, that the individual right to plan your own family must be central to global development. In Chicago, Illinois, before that conference, a group of Black and Indigenous and other women of color met to try to define their own commitment to what we now call reproductive justice. They came up with that term. There is an organization, the Sister Song Collective for Action, which is based out of Atlanta, that was formed in 1997, again by Black women leaders, to form this national multi-ethnic movement for reproductive justice. So the reproductive justice definition given on the Sister Song website, so that you know, is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children that we have in safe and sustainable communities. That is a lot more than just whether or not someone can get an abortion, although if you remove access to safe, legal abortion, you put a huge impediment to that kind of choice and thriving. A little bit further down on Sister Song's webpage, they quote Audre Lorde. "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." Whenever I see a quote, especially by a thinker I admire, I like to track down where that was said in context. And Audre Lorde said that line as a part of a speech called Learning from the 60s, which she presented during Malcolm X weekend at Harvard University in February of 1982. So later in that same speech, she goes into a little bit more depth about the ways we are interconnected. So I'm going to share a portion of her speech now. Within each one of us, there is some piece of humanness that knows we are not being served by the machine which orchestrates crisis after crisis and is grinding all our futures into dust. If we are to keep the enormity of the forces aligned against us from establishing a false hierarchy of oppression, we must school ourselves to recognize that any attack against Blacks, any attack against women, is an attack against all of us who recognize that our interests are not being served by the systems we support. Each one of us here is a link in the connection between anti-poor legislation, gay shootings, the burning of synagogues, street harassment, attacks against women, and resurgent violence against Black people. I ask myself, as well as each one of you, exactly what alteration in the particular fabric of my everyday life does this connection call for? Survival is not a theory. In what way do I contribute to the subjugation of any part of those whom I define as my people? Insight must illuminate the particulars of our lives. Who labors to make the bread we waste, or the energy it takes to make nuclear poisons which will not biodegrade for 1,000 years, or who goes blind assembling the microtransistors in our inexpensive calculators? Again, Audre Lorde said those words in 1982. If I stood up and plagiarized that speech today, nobody would know, except maybe the part about calculators. Replace them with iPhones? None of this specifically says anything about the right to an abortion, the right to prenatal care, the right to comprehensive sex education, which has been shown in every community where it is implemented, a reduction in the number of abortions which are needed. If you have access to education, you have access to contraception, you can make the choices that you need that sometimes allow you to avoid the situation where an abortion may be needed if it's avoidable, which it is not always. Sister Song very specifically also names the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, affirmed in 1948 by the United Nations. And it's longer than I can go into today, but all throughout it is the right to live a life with access to clean water, that was added really late, healthcare, and personal dignity. Too many of us have come from a culture of shame. For some people, this might be the first time you've ever heard this talked about in a church. And for that, I am deeply sorry. Because like our reading said, you are loved. The word God, sometimes in Unitarian Universalist spaces, complicates things for people. That's why I borrow from the recovery community the God of your understanding. That thing which connects us, that is larger than all of us, that to which we feel a tug on the web when another is broken or suffers. Gun violence is antithetical to reproductive justice. I had an example in here of Tamir Rice, a child. Every person killed by gun violence is someone's child. We are not just talking about one decision made by 5 people, as you so rightly note, but the way all of our decisions burn within us, become something that is too heavy to carry, that makes us lash out against our siblings, which is all of us. Survival is not a theory. Audre Lorde's intersectional assessment was made a dozen years before the formalization of the Reproductive Justice Network and less than a dozen years after Roe. But her reminder that we are all connected, that injustice done to any of us keeps all of us from living in a world where it is truly possible to be free. So today we've named a lot of grief over the changes in the last 50 years, changes that we have seen wrought in our own society by those who are not at peace in their hearts. We name this grief, we want to allow ourselves, dare ourselves, to imagine a world where everyone has equal access, not just to surviving, but to thriving. A world where everyone knows that none of us are free until all of us are free. That world will only come to be once we put our dreams into action, let our ideas take on a life of their own, pray with our feet, and each of us fights for the rights being denied to any of us. So may it be.
Keep on marching up to freedom land.
Please join us in extinguishing our chalice and your home chalices, if you have lit them, with these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We are all connected. Not just this room, not just this Zoom, all of us. When we say we want care for all, we mean care. And we need more than medical care, but we need medical care, and we need educational care. You've heard a lot of powerful words here today, so I'm not adding any more. Go be love in the world.